All right, welcome everybody to another conversation with the TLC. Today we're going to be talking about ideation. Where do ideas come from? How do we source them? How do we vet them? How do we store them? All of that. And it should be a great conversation. Before we dive into introducing the panelists, I also want to put out a general call for panelists for our next conversation, which is currently tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And the topic is going to be on prioritization methodologies. So everything from your standard, pie, and I don't know, there's a whole bunch of cute little names that they've got out there for prioritization methods, to prioritization matrices and prioritization custom models, the different inputs that you're using, how are you making decisions about what to test, and how much of it is art versus science and all of that kind of stuff. It should be an interesting conversation, and it seems to be a lively one on various social channels and on this on the conference in the conference world. So hoping it'll be really interesting for those of you that have, especially anybody who has a interesting or unique take on how either you've done personalization in the past with your current company or prior company, or perhaps a methodology that you'd like to try or would like to learn more about, that you've read about, that you would like to share with others. Any type of contribution for the panel would be welcome. Just shoot me an email or send me a message on the TLC Slack or here through the Zoom, and I will get you added to the list of candidates. That is, I think, all of our news and notes. So I think we can get started and go ahead and introduce our panelists for today's conversation. So today we have Chad Sanderson returning. He's been a panelist several times. He used to be at Subway, now he's at Sephora, and hoping to engage him a little bit with some debate today around hypotheses and how we use them or should use them or maybe shouldn't use them. So welcome back, Chad. Second, we have Valerie Kroll of UBS. She's a pretty big name in the optimization and analytics space. For those of you who don't know, she does sit on the board of directors for the Digital Analytics Association. And she's kind of smart, and we really like her, and I'm glad you come back. So welcome back, Valerie. David Torchiano, did you make it?
I did. Sorry about that. I was having some connectivity issues.
No worries. Welcome back. All right. So we have David. He's from NBC Universal, and he is here as well. He's got some interesting stories to share about ideation and how they do things at NBC Universal. Then we have another returning guest, Stephanie Lambert, now of Career Education Corps. I've been working side by side in various capacities with Stephanie for over her last few companies. So really excited to hear how she, if you're willing to share, Stephanie, how ideation has changed between the different types of companies and industries that you've worked with, because that's a unique perspective. And then last but certainly not least is David Whitehead of the American Cancer Society, also a return guest. Thanks for coming back, David. So we have two Davids, so we'll have to try not be to confuse folks when we ask questions specifically. So I'll try to do a good job to make sure you guys know who the question is targeted for, or you can just take turns and talk over each other. That's fine too. But David, welcome back. I really look forward to a perspective from kind of a very different industry than the rest of us are in, and how you guys source ideas. So welcome everybody, and let's go ahead and get started. As a reminder to everybody who is not a panelist, if you would be, or I guess panelists as well, be on mute unless you're talking, and that cuts down on background noise and improves the recording quality and also makes it easier for everybody to hear. And let's get started. So the first area that I want to start with is, where do we source ideas? And I know that's super broad, and we could probably spend the whole time talking just about that, and we'll try not to make that happen. But I'd like to start with, Jacob Jarnval, sorry, Jacob, had a pretty good comment, and we had a conversation earlier today on the TLC Slack about hackathons and using them as a way to source ideas. So I wanted to talk to you guys first, before you dive in and share with us the different ways that you personally have found useful. I'd like to know if any of you have tried some sort of crowdsourcing, brainstorming type scenario like a hackathon for ideation. Does that general silence mean no, none of you have done that?
Hi, this is David with ACS.
Hey, David.
Yeah, we hadn't gotten towards the hackathon idea, which I thought was brilliant. Ours is more of just like a free-form brainstorming session. We'll have a monthly testing and optimization review meeting with all the tests that we've had and the results and things in market. And we reserve a part of that time for, okay, what do you got? Hit us with any, wouldn't it be interestings or actually fully vetted ideas from that point forward, and we'll have some discussions around that to help flesh them out. But no, the hackathon is, or anything of its ilk, we've not tried yet.
What kind of people do you invite to the brainstorming session?
We make it as cross organization as we can. So direct response is a big participant because they do a lot of testing on their own. So they're a really great partner for us. But really anyone who would like to come to the meeting is welcome, from the IT folks who help us develop the work all the way up to the C-suite. You are always welcome, and it's an open invitation, and we hopefully have enough seats for everybody.
Awesome. Awesome. Stephanie, Valerie, any examples in your space?
So we have done some brainstorms, but at my current organization as well as in my past life, the American Medical Association. And we did a very similar type of setup to David, where it was very cross-functional, and we had like people from all different parts. So even if it wasn't your product, we really liked your opinion because you weren't necessarily cursed with the knowledge of the inner workings of your products, and you know exactly where
the inherent bias. Sure.
Exactly. So that was really helpful. I find that brainstorms are really helpful, especially when you're kicking off conversations. Like when I think about bringing on like a new internal client, that's a great way to get things started. But I like to keep the testing ideas coming in, trickling in throughout the month. I try to like reduce friction from capturing them at any time. So sometimes like if you have too many ideas, if you're drowning in that pool, especially if your prioritization criteria, which I know is another topic, is still being debated.
Thanks for that introduction for next time.
Teeing that up. So yeah, the brainstorm is something I typically use on like the beginnings of a product or starting to work with a new team. But I actually don't, I prefer not to keep that like an ongoing thing in terms of like a big brainstorm where you're hoping to walk away with like 100 ideas. More like within the meetings like David talked about, where it's just like an open forum to capture a couple new things.
So you said something kind of interesting. You said, I did it in my former life at the American Medical Association, and we do it here. So the American Medical Association and the American Cancer Society are a little bit in common.
Yes.
Did you bring from the American Medical Association this brainstorming methodology to UBS, or were they doing it before you got there?
They were not doing it before we got there. So yeah, it was like taking the best of like what worked at AMA and bringing it to UBS. So UBS is very much like a test and learn culture in and of itself, especially like where we are. But specifically around like the function of testing on our digital properties, that wasn't a practice there. So
interesting. So, okay, panelists that are not in any form of nonprofit organization. So we got Sephora, we got Subway, we got NBC Universal, and Career Ed. Do any of you guys have experience doing something like this?
So for us, one of the things that I've actually been encouraging at our teams recently and at Sephora, we did it a lot at Subway too, is brainstorming sessions are really good, but they do have some downsides if they're not done properly, right? Because if you put a whole bunch of people in a group, it's almost similar to a focus group. And one of the downsides with focus groups is that if you have really loud people or really charismatic people, they can kind of dictate the flow of the discussion, and they can also shut ideas down really quickly. And so you might have some people that want to express something, but other people may jump on and go, oh, well, maybe technically that's not feasible, or maybe that's, for merchandising, that's not the way that we want to go right now. And that's kind of an issue. So something that we've been working on is having a open experimentation session where our team, the experimentation and testing team, hosts a brainstorming for a lot of the other product departments, for some of the merchandising teams. And we try to teach people, when you're doing brainstorming on your own, when you're doing idea intake on your own, what is the proper way of getting ideas, of interacting with people. The other thing that we really encourage is a lot of one-on-one idea submission. So we have a online portal and application that allows people to go in and submit their own test ideas, either as a draft or as a fully fleshed out idea. And that application right now we're still building out a lot of the logic. Right now it's using like really simplified logic where it's just looking at, is it on a particular page or a particular property or targeting a specific metric? But it's able to look at tests across platforms that other teams have submitted and say, hey, are these two things similar? That way people can look and say, okay, this is something somebody's already done, and it has the hypothesis written out and the results if it's already been run, so they can go through and read and get more
some cross learnings and some iterative, hopefully, ideas.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that speaks back to what you guys were saying earlier about the importance of it not being a one and done, that you need some sort of continuous, I think, Val, you were talking about wanting it to be continuous, right? That it's okay to do a brainstorming session, maybe at the beginning of a new product, a new page, a new whatever, but then instead of this one and done 100 ideas and go run all of those ideas, you want a continuous intake process. What kinds of other sources other than brainstorming sessions are you guys using today for your ideas? Where do your ideas come from?
Well, this is Steph from CEC. My experience with a lot of the brainstorming sessions haven't really produced really valuable results for a number of reasons. And I really agree with what Chad said. It is really specific about how you run them, who is in the group, what you're trying to go after. Where I'm at currently, it's a big company, but our website team is small, and we have total authority on whatever we want to run. So the nice thing about where I'm at now is we don't have to really go through a bunch of people and, get approval on what we want to test. And, that will pretty much stay the same unless the sites aren't performing well. But as we're doing a good job, people have eventually just kind of moved away and let us do our thing. And so really all of our ideas are completely 100% data focused, both qualitative and quantitative. And the main areas that we use would be our analytics system, which we use GA. We also have our back-end systems, which are really important to us because as an education group, we look at leads, and GA leads are great, but a lot of those are, not quality leads. So we go all the way through the funnel. So we look at accepted leads and starts and things like that. We also use a session cam, which is a session recording. You can't, it's basically people on your website. You're just watching what they're doing. And we also use usertesting.com so we can actually go out and, do online focus groups. We have been doing each year, I think we're going to tailor that down a little bit, but we have also been doing in-person focus groups run by a vendor who expertise is in that area.
Awesome.
I guess I'll chime in for a few here. I would also agree that brainstorms haven't really worked, at least in the experiences where I've been part of them. Mm-hmm. Typically, they generate a lot of ideas, but when we actually track the performance of those ideas, the majority of them didn't actually lead to positive results. And one of the things that I'm working on now is to create a structured process to utilize some methodologies from like design thinking and design sprint, but to deconstruct it a little bit so that we can make it a little bit less time intensive for a few folks. Design sprint kind of calls for like one whole week to get key stakeholders in a conference room or to get them together, and oftentimes that's hard to do. One of the elements, though, that has really worked is getting stakeholders that know a problem from multiple perspectives. So getting tech, in our case, getting editorial, getting product, getting design all in the same room, but having some structure, as Chad had mentioned, around that process. So one of the techniques that we use is is called Alone Together. And basically everybody gets a Post-it note. And you get, I'm a big proponent of time boxing. So get a big old time timer, give everyone 5 minutes to write down as many ideas as they can.
On a single Post-it note? Is it a big Post-it note?
No, one per Post-it note.
Okay.
Typically what we'll do is we'll have about 30 minutes to review some data that is relevant to the problem set that we're looking at, or the problem space that we're looking at. We also use usertesting.com, SurveyMonkey, We use Hotjar, which is similar to SessionCam, which
Mm-hmm.
allows us to see how people move throughout the site. And we'll look for different perspectives of data to help inform folks. But then typically we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes. Everybody writes down as many ideas as possible. No ideas are bad ideas because one idea might lead to another idea. But to the idea of trying to minimize bias within a group, everybody can write down their own ideas. And then if we see that 5 out of 7 people all wrote down the same idea, we know that that's a strong theme. So it actually provides some strength to that idea versus one person saying it and then 6 other people agreeing to it. And then we literally just go around the room, put up our Post-its on the wall, and then everybody gets some stickers. And if there are, let's just say 20 ideas on the wall, everybody gets 5 stickers, and then you can vote with your stickers. And the dot voting allows a way to prioritize the idea based on what people think. And then we'll follow a process to take some of those ideas to further prioritize and then start to prototype them. Once those prototypes are kind of been built, we'll then go back to users and get some feedback before we even get to like A/B testing.
So what you described is what I would think of as a brainstorming session. That's how a brainstorming session should be run. So you start with a targeted topic. You start by giving them the information that you have from any available data that you have, and then you open it in some way or form, verbal or not. I like the sticky note idea over the conversation for this very reason Chad described, which is that it tends to have the problem of loud voices shutting down the softer voices. I've also seen a digital form of this. I can't remember the technology, but there's a tool that is specifically for enabling the collaboration in an environment where you have people where maybe the language that's being spoken in the room is a second language for some, or you have some people that are introverts, or whatever the scenario is, but it gives everybody an opportunity to type simultaneously. And there's a big screen where you can actually see what everybody's typing if you want, but the idea is that's all being captured. And then there's a process in the tool where you go in and you categorize it and everything. So it's all done. And by the time you leave the brainstorming session, you have a list of categorized ideas that are also prioritized, which is really cool. It's the same process you're describing, but digital. And it would also make it work if you have a geographically dispersed organization. You mentioned it's hard to get everybody in the room. For some companies, it's hard to get everybody in the same city, not just in the same room.
I would just add, at least for us, having people hold a Sharpie and a Post-it, there is something I find valuable to that. And even before we'll start doing some ideation, we tend to give people some warm-up exercises just to get creativity flowing. And there's a lot that you can just Google for creativity warm-up exercises. But one of them that has worked really well is asking people to come with, if you know the problem space that you're looking to address, asking people to come to the meeting, or you can give them a few minutes during the meeting to actually look at examples across different industries. Because oftentimes if you look at other companies not within your industry, they've solved similar problems, and then you can figure out a way to kind of take that idea and modify it to your needs. And that oftentimes has generated a lot of good ideas for us that have worked out when we have eventually tested them.
Yeah, I want to answer some of the questions, or ask you guys to answer some of the questions that are coming quick, faster than I can keep up with over on the TLC Slack. So Merritt is speaking directly to you guys that we're talking about idea intake. And he wants to know, what kind of forms or tools or applications are you using to get those ideas submitted? Is there a particular platform? How are you using it? Who uses it? How is it used? All the details.
So really quick, because you said Merritt's name, and this is actually building on something that David said, I just have to just say that I have never taken a piece of knowledge or feedback that I heard at a conference faster than when I heard Merritt speak at Opticon. I think it was like 2015, about tracking your win rate to your idea sources. I was like, that so genius. Like,
what a great idea, Merritt.
And that's been amazing. So that was like a really eye-opener, and like that's actually now rolled into prioritization for us. So the people or the teams or the areas that get the best win rates, insight rates, that gets more weight. So just love that idea. And it sounds like, David, you're doing something similar. So,
and you can apply that to your prioritization methodology, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks.
Planting that seed again. But to answer your question, Kelly, about like the intake forms, we did, when I was at the American Medical Association, shoestring budget, everything was like Google Docs. And so we created a Google form, and every person who was a part of our optimization, kind of our cross-functional team, we called it the roundtable. Yep. We like made that everyone's like homepage on their Chrome browser. So as soon as they were in Chrome, they'd be hit with like, what's your ideas? Yeah. We would try any type of tactic to grab that, but and then it fed straight into a form. That was pretty simple. But there's other tools out there. Effective Experiments is one that I'm familiar with that I think is brilliant for managing programs, and they have a crowdsourcing page that funnels and maps to all of the fields for once you're actually in the project management of the test. I think it was very similar to Insight Engine or Experiment Engine that was like followed up by Optimizely, very similar in that way. But those are 2 tools that I know of that not free, but
somebody's got some background. Okay.
Sorry. I know if you take American Medical Association and replace it with ACS, you get a lot of what Val just said for us here at the American Cancer Society. Google Docs have been a very big part of our program, although we have evolved that into, we're using our project management tool that we use internally called Basecamp. For all of the other departments, we've now started to customize that form to bring in ideas or hypotheses from external folks and help us manage the overall testing process from ideation to actual implementation. What we're struggling with is getting everything kind of categorized together and have that win ratio and tracking our success and being able to then have a library of things that people can look at and say, oh, you guys have already done this idea or a variation of it. And having that on reference.
Yeah, the most successful programs that I've seen are either in-house or custom-made solutions. Let me rephrase that. They're either custom-made solutions or something that was created specifically for this purpose, like Val mentioned. And the custom-made solutions I've seen in multiple formats. SharePoint seems to be fairly popular, as does Jira, questionable as far as effectiveness. It's kind of clunky. Maybe one of you have an experience of making Jira work better for that purpose, but I've seen wikis, and of course Google Forms are super popular because they're easy. But the key piece, David, as you mentioned, is it's so important to be able to aggregate, search, and make the information in there easy to find. I've seen them called different things. Instead of calling them an intake tool, they call it a hypothesis library or a learning library or whatever. And then it becomes not just a place where ideas are submitted, but also a place where the results from your testing are stored. And that allows you to begin to aggregate. You look at that win rate, but you can also look at an impact. So winning doesn't always have, this win isn't as much of an impact as that win. So if you put the results in there, now you can say, hey, this person has a higher win rate, but this source of ideas has a higher impact, or these types of ideas, or whatever, these types of tests. So it's pretty powerful.
That's actually exactly what we're working on at Sephora, building that out right now. And the way I kind of think about it is like an experimentation specific DMP. So the idea is that it is aggregating our data from everywhere, and it's essentially serving as a relational database where you're taking in the information from Jira through an API, and you're taking it in through your testing tool through an API, and you're taking it in through, if you have some other prioritization form, like if you're doing it on Google Sheets or if you're doing it on Smart Sheets or something like that. And then it's creating a single line for every single one of your testing parameters and with all of your values, so that you can tie it to other things as well. Like maybe there's a particular developer who gets visual UI tests done really, really quickly. And maybe that's the person that you want to go to, but you wouldn't know that unless you had some way of looking at the data in aggregate. And that's also where a lot of our ideas come from. So for us, we've kind of split it into 3 primary experimentation tracks, basically. Mm-hmm. The first one is, we call it a problem-solving track. The second one is using the sort of our data management tool. And then the third one is the actual optimization tracks. That's the non-hypothesis track I think we might talk about eventually. The micro conversion of the micro problem track essentially comes from our user research team. This is something I set up at Subway as a division, or an aspect of user research is to consistently look for problems. That's really the only goal of that part of the experimentation team. So it's getting people to use a website in very particular ways. So if you're a Subway member, for example, we might want to figure out where are the problems in our catering flow. And we do that by presenting them with different scenarios and getting them to act those scenarios out. Imagine that you're ordering for 100 people, ordering for 200 people or 50 people. Now your order has to be made. Yeah. Right. So that's one of our main areas, and we prioritize that if it came from that track. If it's coming from the DMP, then we use it basically exactly as what you've said, where we look back at the tests that have won previously and on the pages that seem to do well, and we ideate that way. And then that's also how people prioritize. And then the third way is if you have something that's already a winner and now you're just optimizing it and you're making it better. And for us, those are the tests that we have like 90% win rate on. So typically they get prioritized a lot higher than the
because you've already identified the elements that matter.
That's
so
right.
You can just sort of automate you don't need data to back a hypothesis to run it. You don't need to even run hypothesis testing. You can run machine learning to get the most juice out of that squeeze.
Well, not even machine learning. It's more like the way I kind of like to think about it is if you're trapped in a room somewhere and you want to find the highest place in that room. So maybe you want to go up to the top of a stairwell or stand on top of a table. You don't really need a hypothesis to find that. You can kind of search around in the dark, and eventually you're gonna get to the highest point. And this is actually a type of experimental research called response surface modeling. It's used a lot in when people are plotting like mountains in different geographies and things like that. So it's a big method we use, and it's been really effective for us.
Awesome. Okay, somebody just sent me a chat. What are the inputs? What are the required inputs that you are using in your intake process? So when somebody's going to submit an idea, what are the minimum elements that you require of them for that idea submission?
So for us, we take, there's really, I guess, 3 different sections that we use. The first is an experimental or a test design section, where it's just gonna be all your basic information that you would pass off to a developer. Like, what are the pages it's gonna run on? What's the name of it? Like, what's the platform? Give us some information about the test, hypothesis, and things like that. Then we also have an experimental design section, which sounds like kind of the same, but it's not really. So this is more like, what is the type of test that it is? Is it a multivariate test, like a fractional factorial? Is it an A/B test? Is it a non-inferiority test? Then we look at things like sample size and like how long the anticipated runtime is going to be. Then we have developer inputs. So these are things that our devs will actually add after looking at that experiment. So it may be something like, what is the anticipated development time? What is the anticipated complexity? And that's before it goes to like a level of effort session.
But you're not requiring all of that for an idea to be submitted. So if I have an idea and I'm a business user and I don't know how to calculate sample size and I don't know what kind of test type should be run, but I know that there's a business problem that I've identified and I have a hypothesis of how you might, consider solving it. What are the minimum requirements to get an idea submitted?
So in that case, we have no minimums. Like, if you want to put in any idea on the board, then it goes on. But what
it goes into the intake process?
It goes into the intake process. But the idea is that our team, our individual team, is not going to be the ones that are looking at every single intake. That's going to be at the request of whatever team, like whatever product team or whatever marketing team.
And they're going to go gather that evidence and that information and calculate and be able to answer those questions.
Right.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Val, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the intake form that I had set up on the Google Docs at AMA. So I require 4 things for my idea. That's my minimum. And the first 3 pieces are actually like kind of a tricky way to get someone to write a hypothesis. So if I say only 3 hypotheses.
Hold on just a second. If you're not Val, could you mute real quick? We're getting some background noise. Okay, I think that did it.
So we ask like a series of questions, so it's very conversational, and at the end the product is a hypothesis. So it's not perfect 100% of the time, but if you just ask questions like, what would you like to change on this page, this email, this template? What do you like, how will you know if it won? So like, what do you want it to move, and why do you think this is such an amazing idea? Like, why are you so smart to know what's going to win? And so then that becomes like your if then because statement.
Nice.
And we have them track tick boxes on like where the source was as soon as I heard that idea from Merritt. So it's like, is this from, you saw it in the data, was it qualitative, was it quantitative, was it from the call center, which is one of my favorite sources of AMA. Reading through those verbatims is like amazing. So,
have you listened into a call center? If you guys haven't done that, I highly encourage you to do it. It's amazing. You learn a lot.
Pour a glass of wine and enjoy. But that's the minimum requirement, is just to kind of think through, because like that forces us to think about, because I'm a firm believer in, you cannot prioritize a test idea, you only can prioritize hypotheses. And so if I can reduce the friction of me having to go back to the submitter to say like, well, how will you know if this won? Like, what metric do you truly expect to be impacted by this idea? Then that makes it the next step of the process much easier. So that's our minimum.
Awesome. How about you guys, Stephanie and David? What are your minimum requirements for an idea to be considered?
No, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, Stephanie, go.
Mine will be quick. Because at my current company, we don't intake a lot of ideas, and it's not that we don't. We just a lot don't come in, and we don't kind of go and encourage that too much.
You're not soliciting them.
We're not soliciting them, and and we're open to any ideas. But the reality is, for us, our company is not all digital. So there's a very small slew of people who are digital, so they kind of like get what we're going after. And then on top of that, we've just found more value from winning results, and actually after rolling out those results, realizing the impact by the data-driven tests that we run. So for us, if we were to intake something, what we would do is somebody would typically say, like for example, our organic team will say, hey, we noticed that our conversion for a lot of our organic traffic that we're getting to this page is going down lately. Like what, maybe here's an idea to do something with it. And typically their idea is a little bit off, but we'll take what their problem is, and then we will go and do all the data and the digging to figure out how to try and fix it, or to figure out what the problem is. And that's really where our ideation process from external people, from our team, kind of really starts and ends.
Makes sense. I'm not sure which David had started.
It was Whitehead. It was a nice pause because my answer sounds very similar to Val's, which is it's a pretty basic form. It's about 4 to 5 questions, but it takes some of those key informations together, and then we use our gathering to kind of flesh out those ideas further to get a much more formalized brief in place. But we will take what are you trying to prove? What interesting thought would you like to have answered, looking at where their data came from? Is it an analytics question, or was it just they've observed consumer behavior in some capacity, or have they just had a gut instinct? And we start to flesh out those ideas with a couple of the follow-up questions on our Basecamp form, and we'll then take that into a full brief from there. But it has been a very useful tool for us to get those in, and then being able to have this queue of ideas and apply the prioritization to it for, is it something we can get to this quarter, or is it something we have to put into the back burner, or it doesn't really align with our current business strategies, business in air quotes as a nonprofit, of course.
Sure. Okay, so let's take it to the next step. So now we have these minimum requirements for putting ideas in. We have an idea intake process or tool. And by the way, panelists, and TLC members, if you have an intake process or a tool or technology that you're using, I encourage you to go put it in the TLC Slack. Let others know what you're using, what works, what you've tried. But the next step, once you have these ideas, is to vet them. And I'm not talking about prioritizing them, I'm talking about vetting. So in vetting, we decide, hey, yeah, this idea makes sense. We should test it. We should move forward. Or maybe like you just said, you dovetailed nicely into it, David. Thank you. Maybe it doesn't fit with our strategy that we're focused on for this quarter or whatever. So what are the methods that you use to vet an idea? And I guess, Chad, I'll start with you because you described very cleanly 3 different paths that a test intake might come through. And I imagine that you probably have a process once you have the ideas to decide which path a test might sit in, what type of test it might be, and who might run it, or if it should be run. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. So usually the first person, after you have a test that has been, this is something that's been formulated, whatever team has all agreed upon it, that is something they want to run. Usually we'll bring in one of our developer resources. That's kind of the first touch to say whether it's a go or a no-go. Because they have a lot of insight into the other areas of the business that maybe the testing team doesn't, because maybe there's some new modal or something that's going out that's going to conflict in the following sprint, or maybe there's, who knows what it is. So if it passes through that initial kind of eye check by the developer, then it's going to have to go through whatever other number of stakeholders that test might run across. So if it's going to be a test on a product page, then it's going to have to go through merchandising, right? Because those are the people that determine this is what needs to be shown in this particular order. And then they have stakeholders at Sephora specifically because, it's an aggregate of a lot of other different makeup companies. So if it makes it through, and that's going to be different for each sort of system, something like an optimization where you're only changing something or you're modifying something that already exists versus adding something that's completely new and that has never existed before. It's a lot easier to do the third, and we found that you can go through less channels. But if it's the first, if it has a lot of touch points, then it needs to hit a lot of different people before it actually gets the okay.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Valerie, how do you guys vet ideas?
So I've actually never kicked out an idea. I just
test everything.
I'll test anything. No, I like the prioritization to be my bad guy. Like I'm the good cop. And so I would put things like, to what Jed's point, like, would we launch this variation if it won? That's
actionability.
Kind of or like, does everyone bless it?
Yeah.
So it might just be idea number 499 and we'll never get to it, but I never just kick out an idea. So the vetting kind of happens, like I just kind of feel like it happens organically with the prioritization criteria, because we ask ourselves a lot of questions about what makes a test good to run right now.
So your vetting is your prioritization and vice versa.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And I like that, it didn't get kicked out, it just got deprioritized. You don't have to tell anybody their baby's ugly. It's just not important right now. How about David Torchiano? Do you guys have a way of vetting ideas as they come through? David, are you still there? Are you on mute? All right, I'm going to assume we lost David, and I'll move on to Stephanie. I know that you guys don't have a solicitation of ideas, and the bulk of the ideas come from test plans. Do you have to do anything if somebody says, we ran this test, we like the results, and we'd like to iterate on it a little bit further? Are you doing anything to vet to make sure that makes sense, or do you not have to because of the lack of, because of the fact that you're the source of the ideas?
Maybe a little bit of both, but we definitely partner. We're not siloed, and we definitely partner with a lot of people, and there are some good ideas, but honestly, our brainstorming just sounds a lot different from yours. We focus on, we want people to bring the problems to us, and then we determine how to test into it and how to fix the problem versus them coming to us and telling us what to test. Sure. So that is kind of really what our vetting process is. Really, if somebody comes and says, we want to test that, we want to change this image on this one page, that's really not going to move anything. Like, we're not going to move on that. The question I would follow up, if they wanted to be serious about it, the question I'd follow up is, what problem are you trying to solve? And then we will determine how to fix the problem. And I feel like I actually, at Express, if we go back a little bit, I started implementing that there as well. Like, I was at Express before CEC, for everybody on the call. And of course, a completely different environment over there, lots of vetting, lots of ideas coming from all over the place. But to a lot of your point, it got crazy. There were so many ideas. How do you figure them all out? So really what we ended up happening is that's where I started learning, like, I'm going to go after the problem areas. And then when someone gives you a problem, say you have 10 problems that are provided to you from all over the company, you're going to look at those problems and you're going to look into the data, qualitative and quantitative, to determine what has the most negative impact on your site. And then that's where you're going to go after. And then you start thinking into, how do we fix this? And you do more data, more analysis, competitive analysis, whatever, to come up with some creative ways to fix that problem. And that's kind of how we vet our tests.
Gotcha. How about David Whitehead?
Hit the unmute button. We've been currently looking at our intake list, and we also get some of the hallway drive-bys, so it's not always a buttoned-up process, but we'll take our prioritization and layer that over. And we've been using Pi because it worked for us, and it makes us small and nimble, but it gives us that ability to say, here's what we can focus on, here's how these things align, and while it's subjective. And I read this very interesting article the other day about different methodologies from some blog at Search Discovery. Name may be familiar, but
thanks for the name drop.
You're welcome. We're looking at hopefully implementing a much more objective methodology to prioritize ideas. And again, like Val, we don't turn away any idea, but we will obviously have limited resources and time and be able to implement things. So we do add that lens of, what is the impact? What is our ability to take that and then do something with it? And we'll have conversations again in our brainstorming meetings as well to help us vet out the ideas. And then we build our project queue off of just the scoring and whether or not we have the resources to do that kind of test. And can we then, from this test, take that and deliver that to someone to actually implement into a production environment? I serve as the product owner for our donation platform as well. So we focus a lot on improving our conversion rate on our donation work, because I'm the same person who needs to make the changes. So it's really easy for me to say, oh, we can take this and make a bigger impact. Exactly. So yeah,
That's
exactly. So we're lucky in that we're a small team and we're kind of nimble. So sounds cavalier, we kind of operate under the forgiveness versus permission rule. So if we can get a test, get it up and running, we'll say, hey, we've made this impact. We keep people informed, but we have a flexibility that I'm sure not a lot of people have with other stakeholders. But we can get quite a few tests up, run, and results in-house without a whole lot of committees or people involved.
So you don't have to deal with legal and compliance?
We try not to, but yes, we do have to deal with legal more so than compliance. But yeah, they're involved in our conversations, probably more so than I would like.
Maybe not as much as in the financial sector.
Exactly, yes.
Or insurance. Okay, so it sounds like you guys are, in general, the minimum requirements are related to what you would need to develop a hypothesis. And yes, Chad, I know yours is different, but for the others, so you need the basic, what is the problem statement? What do you want to try to do? What are you trying to impact? And how would you know what if you're right? And then I think I heard both Val and David Whitehead say that you're also looking at actionability. So what action would you take based on these results? I think that's really interesting. I've seen various versions of that. And I've also seen additional things like, and I can't remember if it was Val or Chad, but one of you talked about the strategic objectives of the organization. So it's if it's aligned to the pillars, or something that the organization has said, hey, our goal for Q2 is to focus on this particular thing, and being able to say, hey, check that box. This is going to help towards that thing. Might help in the vetting or prioritization, but we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. But is there anything else that you guys on the call want to know about intake, about ideas, about vetting, about technology that we haven't gone over? If so, you guys we have about 10 minutes left. You can throw those questions in the Zoom chat or the TLC calls conversation. I see a couple of questions over here that I seem to have missed. So let me read through those really quick. Jacob asks, how do you encourage colleagues from other areas that you don't typically work with, say customer support, to submit ideas? He says, maybe like prizes for good performing ideas or something similar.
Yeah, I can say from my experience at the AMA, especially where there was like no testing optimization, we were building that from the ground up. It was really like, I was not above any form of gamification to get people excited about testing. And one of the things that I did that worked really well for us is whenever someone submitted a test idea, when we actually tested it, the test name had their name in it. So sometimes we have like UX would be
some accountability there, but also, I'm going to follow my test.
Exactly. So it'd be like the Ben versus Tim test. And so like, that's how we would like promote it and things like that. So people would get like credit, and we had this like whiteboard and we would put it up there. But that was seeing that visibility, I think, encouraged other people who might not otherwise have contributed to get excited about participating in something that was like fun and engaging and moving.
Take some ownership. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. Let's see. Christina is asking, how long should it take from idea intake to, she says discussion implementation. I'm not sure if she means implementation of winner or implementation of test, but let's take the front end of the cycle and say to launch. So from idea intake to test launch, assuming it was vetted and prioritized, what's the cycle time that you guys have experienced? How long should it be?
So for our team, or for Sephora, it's really going to depend. And maybe that's something I actually should have clarified at the beginning. I think our experimentation structure might be a little different, because our group really serves as enablement for the rest of the product teams and marketing teams and other business units of Sephora. So when we're talking about doing prioritization and vetting and things like that, really it's going to be on the product teams to do that, because
Sure.
it's their product.
They have their own funnels, basically.
Exactly. And they're going to have their own individual sprint cycles and when they're going to have tests going out and how they're modifying them and what they're affecting. So in terms of the how long something takes, what I can say is that from what I've seen, when the process is moving really, really well and everybody involved is very educated and they bring data to the table, it can happen really quickly. Like you can have an idea that goes up on Monday, it's put into a backlog on Friday, and then if they're working in maybe like 1 week sprint cycles, because we have developers that function actually, I shouldn't say sprint, they're actually working outside of sprints, but they're within their own testing sprints.
Sure.
So, I mean, it could be in their sprint catalog the next week. So the activation can be really, really quickly. And the great thing is if you're recording all the data, then, it doesn't matter and nothing gets lost in translation, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. But I know that a lot of companies have a lot of frustration because in the beginning you open the floodgates and you say, everybody submit your ideas, and they do, and they get vetted and they see that their idea is prioritized. But then due to things like dev cycles and sprints, it can be, or the available traffic on your optimization calendar, whatever the situation is, it could be months before their test is ever launched. And so there's a lot of frustration, and it leads to some of these great sources of ideas pulling back from submitting ideas because they feel like that's a gap, and it would be faster to go directly to the design or product team and just develop it and launch it. If testing is seen as slowing you down because the cycle between idea and implementation is too long, then people will stop submitting ideas.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is, and I know that this is again 2 weeks, but if you have a really, really robust prioritization system that's doing all the work for you, it's doing all the heavy lifting, and people have an awareness that, okay, if I submit something and the prioritization level is not going to be high, and even better if they can visually see that, like if there's an application or something, so they can see what their score is as it's submitted.
Yeah,
it's really helping set the expectations on.
And that's so important, and it's so true. We actually build in a a scoring calculation. So as they answer the questions in the intake, they immediately are getting a score. But the cool thing about it is they also get to make changes and see that impact that it has on the score. So now they're learning what matters, and maybe they can't do it with this particular idea, but they're going to bring ideas in the future that have a greater likelihood of being prioritized. So you're actually educating them by just having them use your intake tool, which I think is really nice. In a situation when you have a bunch of people, if you can go talk to them, go talk to them. But if you have, a globally dispersed or an organization where, like somebody asked on the TLC, like how do you get customer service to send you ideas? If you open it up that way to groups you don't typically sit with, that's a really great way to sort of evangelize and educate. We have about 4 more minutes. Just real quick, Ryan asked a very simple question, which I think you guys could all answer super quickly. And I think it would be even more powerful if those not just on the panel answer the question. I'll ask the panel to answer on the call. Everybody else, if you'll answer over on the TLC Slack, that'd be awesome. The question is simple. What technology do you use for A/B testing? And we'll go in order, start with Chad.
As far as a testing tool, it's Adobe Target.
Adobe Target. Valerie?
Same.
Both of you guys, is it premium or standard?
Premium.
Also premium.
Okay. David Torchiano, are you on? Are you back? Nope. Okay. Stephanie?
I currently use Optimizely. We're looking at moving to Maximizer. I've used both Maximizer, Optimizely, Adobe Tested Target, and Visual Website Optimizer within my career.
Awesome. David Whitehead?
We are currently using Optimizely, but the transition to Optimizely X has vexed me greatly. So we're looking at other opportunities to find a new platform.
Yep. All right. Everybody else, if you'll answer, and if you're on Optimizely or Target, let us know if it's Optimizely, Optimizely X, although I think regular Optimizely went away, but there's Optimizely full stack, Target standard, Target premium. They even have another thing that's basically full stack, but server side, client side, that kind of stuff. Let people know. I think it would be helpful. I had a couple of people who reached out who had questions that was really specific to their tool, and they wanted me to connect them to others in the TLC that use the same tool. This is a great way for us to share that information so you guys can learn from each other. So I hope you guys had a interesting time today, learned some stuff. I did. Great panel. Thank you guys. I really, really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experiences with ideation. One last pitch. If anybody has anything they want to share, or they want to make sure that they get the opportunity to steer the conversation around prioritization so that something that you care about gets talked about, now's the time to let me know that you're interested in being in the prioritization panel. Right now it is tentatively scheduled for 2 weeks from now, 2 Fridays from now, around the same time. I can be flexible if a couple of panelists need it to be at a different time or date. But you got to reach out now if you want to have a say, and I look forward to hearing from you guys, and it should be a great conversation. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Kelly.
Absolutely.
And the rest of the panel.